Alright everybody, I just wanted to go ahead and give you a kind of a detailed description on this breaker box. It's a 50 amp service for this SKOOLIE. That means you have two hot legs, so you could potentially run larger equipment, like anything that needs 240 volts, like dryers, larger heaters, larger mini split systems, things like that. So if this thing's ever set up as like a permanent house and you want to add on large things like that, you're gonna have at least more than a 30 amp service would offer, because you're gonna actually have two hot legs. So you potentially can have like 240 volts of service instead of just 120. But a lot of larger motorhomes, the big I think they're called Class A's or whatever, they mostly all have 50 amp. Big fifth wheels have 50 amp, so it's fairly common. I mean, you can find 50 amp services at a lot of campgrounds, but a lot of campgrounds don't offer 50 amp, so you'll have to have an adapter. If you want to go with a 50 amp service, you'll need to carry an adapter with you so that you can go down to 30 amps. Or you can get an adapter and go all the way down to 15, 20 amp service. But we went ahead and set this bus up for large potential, because right now it's not going to have any solar in it, and really no 12 volt other than just what is on the bus mechanisms. Eventually we will be installing solar, but that's going to be a year or two down the road. So went ahead and did a 50 amp service. You can see there, I got to move the bus. I'm probably going to be doing that tomorrow so that our yellow cord will reach all the way. Right now I'm borrowing the neighbor's, but so I'm going to move the bus further over that way, and it's going to get me out from under the tree, and I can do some finalization on the roof as well. Anyways, just real kind of detailed here on this panel. There's a couple things I need to go over, because like I've said in the past, I am an electrician. However, I'm a residential electrician. I've never wired an RV, anything on wheels before. So there were some things that I needed to study up on. There were some things that I needed to come to the understanding. They were a little bit different than being in a house. So first and foremost, I need to say that, I guess first and foremost, I'd like to say that my work is not nearly as squared off in 90s as I would normally like to have it in a house, but it's because I've used this SO cord, portable power cord basically, and I used it because it's all exposed, so there's not a worry of heat buildup. So you don't want to use something like this in behind walls or things like that. These are like really heavy duty extension cords. This is 10 gauge and this is 8 gauge for the power. So my box is not nearly as neat as I would prefer it to be, but at least everything's here. It's hooked up, and actually I got the breaker turned off right now out there. The breaker is turned off, so there's no power in here, so don't worry with my hand being in here. And another thing too is, you need to understand, if you don't really know anything about electric, you don't want to be doing this stuff like this. You really need to get guidance from somebody who is qualified and potentially certified to do it, so that you don't mess anything up, because electricity can be deadly, so you need to know exactly what's going on. Alright, so back into the service here. I got 3 circuits so far wired. It's the driver's side of the bus is wired from pretty much here up. We still got to put power to the shop back here in the back where I'm at. That'll come in here in a little bit. So I do have two 20 amp circuits. These are the 2 GFCI circuits that are up by the water storage tank area. One of those will be for the water heater and pump, things like that. And the other one's going to be for the air conditioner, which I'm getting ready to move tomorrow. It's going to be over in that area. And then just an extra one for if we need anything for over on that side of the wall. And the other one here, this one runs up to the kitchen area counter. And I did put all 20 amps on here. Another thing I need to say is this is a 100 amp service. So you may see a 100 amp breaker here, but there's not 100 amps coming into this. The only potential you can get out of that is 50 amp, because that's a 50 amp breaker over there on that pole. So while some people might say your wire is not sized right for your breaker, in this instance only, and I'm not speaking for anyone else, but for me, I know that this breaker is just a means of disconnect. That's all it is. It's a switch to turn my power on and off. Now, some might argue, and I may even contemplate it myself, that, you know, with a 100 amp breaker, it does give that potential if there was like a power surge or something. But it's very, very rare that something like that would happen. But I mean, I may change it out in the future anyway. But just by, you know, reading through, I've even had the code book out here in the last couple days, reading, doing a lot of studying and research on this. And this is just a disconnecting means. This is essentially needs to be considered a sub panel, not a service. That's one thing I had to get into my brain. This is not a service like a main service on a house. This is basically a sub panel, because your service is where you're getting your power from. That's the service there. This is a sub panel. So you do things differently on a sub panel than you do on a main service. So this is a disconnect. I could have these just wired straight in with no breaker whatsoever, but if I were to do that, I would still need a disconnect somewhere in the line. I would have needed to disconnect down on the outside of the bus, or I would have needed to disconnect here, and I could have ran the power to the disconnect, and then from the disconnect into here. You got to have a disconnect for a sub panel, and so this is my disconnect. Alright, so I've got my 8.4 coming in, I got my 2 hot legs, black and red, and I got my neutral down here on the bottom. Now, on a sub panel as well, another thing you have to do is separate your bonds or grounds and your neutrals. You don't want those to be on the same line, because you don't want your grounds to potentially come electrified by your neutrals. A neutral does carry current on it because it's your return path in AC circuitry, but your ground should not carry current unless an emergency situation and it needs to basically ground out and throw like a high voltage arc. It needs to carry it to ground. That's what this is considered. So that's why these are separated, so that they don't become electrified on a normal basis. As these travel back through the cord and back to the service, then at the service panel over there at the service entrance equipment, the neutral and ground are bonded in that box, and that's where code requires that they be bonded together, not at a sub panel. So I do, however, have a bond. I did go and get this is a number 8 gauge. You can do bare wire or green. This was like a cut that they had, like an extra, like somebody cut it off and it was like the end of the spool or whatever, and it was basically 6 or 7 feet, and it was pretty much exactly what I needed. So I ran this down. I actually had room to run it through the same sleeve, and I bonded it to the chassis of the bus. Not an absolute have to, but I feel like it's the safest way to be in case, you know, anything major were to happen, like at a campground or whatever. You'd be covered electrically. There was spare, you know, quite a bit left over, and I did not cut it off just in case I need to pull more of it down, move it to a different spot on the chassis or whatever. So I just left that coiled up in here in case I ever need it. So I grounded my circuits, well, bonded, grounded, however you want to call it. I've ran all of them over here to one bar right here. Now, another thing you need to know, in the boxes that I've done so far, in the metal boxes up in the kitchen area, I actually ran a ground pigtail and grounded the box, the metal itself, so that the metal boxes, the covers, and the pipe is all grounded. And so those are all tied into these, which comes back here, and everything grounds together, bonds together here in the panel. So, and then that's tied in with the chassis as well, so all the metal is protected. Alright, I just wanted to go over that with you guys. I'd said a few days ago I was going to do it, and I never did it, and quite honestly, I'm kind of embarrassed by the look of this panel. I mean, I normally just square everything off. I normally have 90s for all my work as much as possible, but this cable is not allowing that to happen. But everything's in. We got power now. We got 50 amps of service. We got a lot more potential if we need it, and I'm pretty excited about it. And I got the cover right here. I've already done my knockouts. I just got to put the cover on, and I got to put a couple more staples or straps or whatever on these. And then tomorrow I'm moving the air conditioner and getting it out of the way, and then I can run the power to the passenger side. So check back for an update. Thanks.